Hello, I'm Richard Sher, and it's time to square off. Let's meet this week's panel. We welcome back a square off veteran, the amazing and interesting Catalina Byrd, our talk show host, Andrew Langer, and two of the the country's or the world's distinguished attorneys, Bob Scherr and Arnold Weiner. Welcome to the program. Well, if you watched last week's program, GOP committee woman Nicola Ambrose, she got into it. Got into it. So you might want to look back, take a look at that show. She got into it with Robin Murphy and Chris Kennedy, two liberals, about Donald Trump. Conservative Professor Rick Vatz was also involved. It was one of the most heated arguments in square off history. Trump's legal team arguing that he should be exempt from the 4 criminal charges, alleging that he tried to overturn the result of the 2020 election because he claims he's entitled to presidential immunity. Arnold, you're the senior here. Kick it off.
Well, Trump really outdid himself this week in his argument for immunity in the D.C. circuit. His lawyer argued that even if Mr. Trump were to kill a rival for the presidency, to order a hit on his rival for president, that he would be immune from prosecution unless he was first impeached by the Congress, including having the bill of impeachment come from the Republican-dominated House of Representatives. He really, really showed the absurdity of the lengths that he's going to.
Then he took on the judge when he was ordered not to, stick to the case.
Oh, in the civil case, yes.
Go ahead. Andrew, what do you think?
Listen, there are some very interesting constitutional arguments here, but I want to come back to something, which is this issue of Trump trying to stay in power. One of the things that keeps coming up, especially as we come up on the anniversary of January 6th, is if Trump wanted to stay in power, and he really wanted to stay in power, he just could have not left office. Not that I wanted him to do that, not that I would have supported that, but I just keep coming back to this idea that if Trump really were this megalomaniacal figure who was hell-bent on maintaining power, then he could have just not left the office, right? It was one of those things. You come back to 1974 when Nixon, on the precipice of impeachment, resigns, and he goes off on the helicopter, and we say, okay, the Republic endures, the Republic continues. And there was a sigh of relief in that moment. And that's not to take away the horrors of Watergate. And so the question, there was always a question, right? And the folks were talking about this leading up to the transition of power in January 2021. Will Trump actually leave office? And so to me, it goes to, well, is he a fascistic, megalomaniacal, and I know I'm butchering the pronunciation of that word, figure, or was he this other guy? And I think the truth is obviously somewhere in between. I just keep coming back to that point. If he really wanted to hold on to power, well, then he could have just declared himself still the president and hung on to it, but he didn't do that. And I think that goes to this idea that there wasn't really an insurrection, that there was a riot in the Capitol, that the Republic was.
I'm not sure.
Anyway, that's
Andrew. I don't quite understand. What do you mean? What do you mean he'd just stay in power? You mean like sit at his desk in the White House and not leave?
Yeah.
That would have lasted about 15 minutes.
Well,
I don't think that would have worked.
But Bob, this is what it gets into, right? It gets into this question of, and this gets into what Arnold was talking about, this question of the absurdity of the situation, right? Because I do think that on some level, there's a constitutional argument to be made that a president can't be prosecuted for crimes while he's in office, and he has to be impeached first. But on the other side of it, you're absolutely correct. What happens if a president just sits there and says, well, I'm still the president. The election was stolen from me, so I'm going to maintain power.
Well, Andrew, you want to give Trump great credit because he didn't call out the army to put down the rest of the governmental structure. Instead, Trump did what he always did. He dreamt up a phony, crooked scheme to try to keep himself in power.
Well,
I
Guys,
do not
mean,
hold
believe,
on,
please,
hold on,
please,
I
let
must
me
hear.
finish. I do not believe that Trump deserves kudos for picking the dishonest way of trying to stay in government
I'm not
instead
giving
of trying
kudos.
to call out the army.
We got to hear
I'm
from
saying,
Andrew. Stop.
sorry,
We have not heard
I'm
from
sorry.
our very famous analyst, Catalina. What are your thoughts about all this?
I agree completely with Arnold, and I think that the point that Andrew is trying to make is kind of funny because he actually did, from the time that he lost the election all the way up until January 6th, declare that he was still the president and that the election had been rigged and he was robbed. And so part of what is happening in this case is his own tweets and his own commentary is being used against him as part of the motive for how January the 6th happened. So I don't think that he was savvy enough to believe that if he sat at the desk, that was going to change anything. But he was very, very clear about when the vote to confirm the results were happening. And he was very, very vocal about the fact that Mike Pence was a traitor. And that is what precipitated the things that we saw take place on January the 6th. So
The game plan here for Trump, very simply, the legal arguments are irrelevant. He knows he's not going anywhere with immunity. You're not allowed to commit crimes and keep your immunity, okay? He knows it, his lawyers know it. The game plan is to get the January 6th trial beyond the election. Once it's beyond the election, and if Trump wins the presidency, he pardons himself. That's the game plan. They're trying to prevent any trials prior to the election. And I think on that, it's going to happen. I don't foresee any of these cases being tried before November. None of them.
Bob, as another lawyer, I think you're really right on the money. The Supreme Court had the opportunity to bypass the Court of Appeals, take the immunity case immediately, and allow the trial to go forward, the January 6th trial. Instead, they refused to do it. So what's going to happen now is the DC Circuit will, after some period of time, rule on the immunity question. Trump will then have 90 days within which to ask for the Supreme Court review. And if the Supreme Court waits until the end of this year's term, June, to decide to take the case, they will not take up the case until the fall or the winter of next year, and Trump will have accomplished exactly what he's trying to do.
Listen,
I do want to say, Bob, let me speak.
Yeah,
thank you. Trump said Biden is attempting to push him off the ballot, adding, quote, "This is not the way it goes. There will be bedlam in the country. It's the opening of a Pandora's box." Now, what were you going to say, Andrew?
Well, listen, I was going to say two things. Number one, as someone who, I was an elector in the 2008 election. I didn't have to cast my electoral ballot because my candidate lost. But as someone who, as an elector in 2008, was getting emails relentlessly in 2016 asking me to change my electoral college vote, I'm back to wondering, well, how, if the efforts to change the electors' vote in 2020 was an illegal scheme, how come the folks who were trying to do this in 2016 were never prosecuted for doing it? I want to sort of lay that out there. And the other part of this is, to me, this is exactly what the left has wanted and the Democrats have wanted. They want us talking about Donald Trump's eligibility to run for office. They want us talking about whether or not January 6th was an insurrection, because nobody wants to talk about the real issues that are happening in America today. And nobody wants to talk about the Biden administration's record and what they're doing in terms of the administrative state. They want us talking about Trump, and January 6th. And that's that. There are real serious issues that we need to be focusing on. We're not talking about them.
Andrew, I was born and raised in the Republican Party, and I don't believe it is the left that is making us have to talk about Trump. It's the fact that he's incapable of shutting his mouth and observing gag orders, and he intentionally says things that are salacious. And the job of media is to get ratings and to get clicks and links and views. And so it's in the same way that he got elected and didn't run any presidential ads in 2016. It's not that the left or the right wants to be talking about this guy. He's created all out civil war in the party that I grew up
Catalina,
in.
Let me get my 2 cents in here. Let me get my 2 cents in.
Bob, let me just make one point real quick. As
Hold
I've been
it
saying
one at a time,
consistently for the last
guys.
3 years, if you
I'm
want
gonna
Donald Trump
finish
to
my
go
point,
away,
Andrew.
Hold it, Chad.
Andrew, I'm going to finish my point.
sorry,
Every
Right.
single day for the last 20, let's see, he started in 2015, we're in 2024. For the last 9 years, every single day he has done something that has made it, the media would be remiss to not speak of it. But this isn't some plot from the left. This is a clown who specialized in reality TV and knows how media works and is using that to his advantage.
Here's a problem. Here's a problem. If we, I'm not for Trump. All right. I voted for him twice. I'm not voting for him again. So I'm prefacing my remarks by saying that. I hope these states don't try and take him off the ballot. I know Colorado has, there's another state or two that's doing it. But the problem is,
states, Bob.
What will happen in this country if voters are denied the opportunity to cast a vote for Donald Trump? You haven't seen Bedlam yet, like you'll see there. Let me just make one other point. How can we do this? How can Colorado, for example, say that he committed an insurrection? We're taking him off the ballot, but Maryland says he didn't commit an insurrection. We're not going to take him off the ballot. That's the problem. It will be not uniform, where either he commit, in other words, it should be a federal issue. And I know it's not, but it should be either you take them off all over the country or you don't take them off. But how can some states do it and other states not?
Hold on.
The Republicans that took him off the ballot.
Hold on. We have to get to one other point about the presidential race. And that is, you'll remember at the end of the week, Chris Christie dropped out of the race, saying that he will, and pledging that he'll do everything in his power to see that Donald Trump does not get back into the White House. In a comment captured on an open microphone, Christie apparently was talking with Governor Ron DeSantis, supposedly talking about Nikki Haley, saying she's going to get smoked. So, reaction to that?
I think it makes any difference. It's a shame, Chris Christie actually comes out of this campaign looking a lot better than when he went in, because now he's got respect from, he's not getting respect from Republicans that support Trump, whether he ran or didn't run, but he's getting respect from the rest of the country. And he's got himself in a position now where he can be an attorney general, either for any Republican other than Trump, or even Joe Biden. He could be his attorney general. He's looking for other things. He can also be a commentator now on all the talk shows, which is what he will do. And I think that's how he's going to try and take Trump down, by going on talk shows and bad-mouthing him. The fact that he got caught saying that, I don't think it's going to make any difference. He didn't say anything negative about her. He just said she's going to lose. It didn't say he wants her to lose. He just said, I think she's going to. He can say it. I don't think it hurts him.
Hey, by the way, we have to wrap this up. At the end of the week, word came out that Maryland's ex-governor, Republican Governor Larry Hogan, has stepped down from the No Labels Board in a possible sign that he might come into this. What do you think? You think he has a shot?
The speculation is that he might come into it. Where's the path for him to do it?
There isn't one.
There isn't any.
Here's the path. Here's the path. If you get the right third-party candidate, the path is, there's a lot of Democrats that don't like Biden, and there's a lot of Republicans that don't like Trump. If the third party can get the group of dissatisfied Democrats and Republicans together, anything can happen.
The issue really is whether or not the chaos throws this election into the House. And that's I think part of the path for the no label situation because again, it's not going to be a three-way race. It's actually going to probably wind up being a five-way race when you consider the other lower tier candidates. You have Larry Hogan, you've got RFK, you've got Cornel West. So in a five-way race for president where these candidates are going for very small numbers of votes on either side to try to draw them away, they can have an impact in
And
changing.
what white people do you think are going to vote for Cornel West? I'm so curious.
There are Democrats who are very unhappy with Joe Biden who will go out and vote for Cornel West.
All right, fellas, ladies, we're going to
Really?
take may I please introduce the award-winning voice of Square Off, Howard Mellison. Come on, Hal.
Yes, thank you, Richard. You know, I'm sure you've seen some of the Barry Glazer TV commercials. They're different. They get your attention. They also get results. That's why Barry Glazer and his team, including an in-house doctor, make no apologies for getting every penny they can from the insurance companies. So when it comes to personal injury or medical malpractice, there's only one choice. Give Barry Glazer a call at 410-547-8568. And you know, there's a lot of diners in Baltimore, and the most famous of them all are the Double T diners. TT,
Right.
totally terrific. You're sure to find the best breakfast, lunch, or dinner at the Double T Diner from their phenomenal and enormous amount of selections on their menu. There's Double T locations on Route 40 West, Perry Hall, White Marsh, Annapolis, Pasadena, and the EC Diner in Ellicott City. Plus, try By the Docks in Middle River for their Monday night lobster specials. They're all in the Double T family. Back to you, Richard.
Thanks, Howard. And folks, please support our wonderful sponsors who make all of these great faces come into your home every week. All right, let's talk about the Defense Secretary, Lloyd Austin. He created quite a controversy. He failed to disclose that he was being hospitalized at Walter Reed for prostate cancer. So he was admitted on January 1st. The disclosure of Austin's diagnosis and cause of his hospitalization came amidst controversy over the Pentagon's failure for days to inform President Biden, failing to inform him or the public that the Defense Secretary was in the Walter Reed Medical Center for surgery, then ended up in intensive care with a serious infection. Who wants to speak on this?
Listen, God
I've
forbid-
had issues with the Secretary of Defense long before this most recent revelation. I think he was has been a big factor in the insufficient support that we've provided to Ukraine, holding back tanks, holding back planes. I also think he's been extremely timid in any of the reactions that we've had when the Americans have been struck, American soldiers have been struck. And so I don't think he's any great Secretary of Defense to start with. And then he compounds it by trying to keep a secret that he's got prostate cancer and is undergoing general surgery at a time when all of this is brewing. I think it's time to let him go off to his military retirement.
President
I
Biden,
totally agree with you.
Bob,
Totally.
Bob, I did want to mention that President Biden has the utmost trust, he says, in his Secretary of Defense. Go ahead,
Well,
Bob.
number one, I don't believe that. I know that's what he said. I don't believe that. This was what the secretary did was show so much disrespect for the president. Can you imagine? I mean, we are involved in wars now. Americans are being attacked on a daily basis. And if the president wanted to react a little earlier than he did the other day by going into Yemen, suppose he wanted to do it 2 days earlier. There was no Secretary of Defense, and his deputy was vacationing in Puerto Rico, and his chief of staff had the flu. I mean, this is like a joke. The lack of respect that he showed his boss, who was the commander in chief, the president, he ought to be fired. I mean, can you imagine if you have an employee and you don't know where the employee is? I mean, it's just no business would put up with this. And I don't believe that the president is saying he respects him. He's not going to fire him. I don't believe it. I think Austin's going to go. I do.
Kat,
I think that when one chooses to live at the level of hysteria that Bob has mastered to an art, it's easy to lose logic. I don't think that the president didn't know. I don't think that you can be in Walter Reed as the Secretary of Defense and it not get back to the White House. I do think not making it public knowledge while we are engaged in two conflicts is important for national security, and a decision that was made by people who have authority and clearances that we don't have, and we found out when we needed to find out. But I don't believe for a moment that no one in the White House or the president knew. I think that they
The White House said they didn't know. The White House said it. It wasn't. It made them look bad. Why would they admit to it? Why would they admit that they didn't know he was there? All it does by admitting it is make the president look bad.
And the
They wouldn't
national
admit it. They didn't know
security
where he was.
advisor, the national security advisor said that his entire office and the president's office had both been kept in the dark.
I think that they say that to create cover, but I don't believe that is true. And we've all seen
Create cover. It makes them look like idiots.
and we all
It does the opposite. What if they want to look good? They say, "Well, we knew about it."
Andrew,
They did.
they don't look like idiots. They look like idiots to you, but if they had said it when it was happening, it made us vulnerable in a way that, again, I think it might have been a decision to say that in the back end, because as it was happening, it didn't make sense to be engaged into active wars and not have a Secretary of Defense.
Here's the thing, right? We live in a republic where there are checks and balances, and we have a command and control system. So that if an appointee, the Secretary of Defense, becomes ill or vulnerable, there's a chain of succession that exists in order to take care of that. And we as the public have a right to know that those things are happening so the republic continues to function. It does not make us look weak. It makes us look strong when we do this. God forbid that Lloyd Austin had actually died on the table or died in intensive care. And then it goes along. It's the flip side of what Bob was saying. It's not just what if we were attacked, but for the White House and for the optics, what would have happened if God forbid the Secretary of Defense had died on the table and nobody knew about it? Then there would have been even greater questions as to what the hell is going on with this administration, right? There's a real question about the competence of this administration and the general functioning of government. This just makes them look like idiots. Either way, like there's no good answers here.
go ahead, Arnold.
I think Catalina made a really good point when she said that he had the operation in a military hospital. To me, that proves how naive Austin was, that he could keep this whole thing a secret while he's in a military hospital, Walter Reed, getting his treatment.
Yeah, I mean, I believe that there were contingencies in place that might not come out until somebody writes a book when the administration is over. But Puerto Rico's not that far. If he dies on the table, they get to the deputy, his vacation ends early, and we hear about it in a press conference, and the whole nation's in shock and awe and grief because this man who had cancer that we didn't even know had cancer died trying to get treatment and discreetly and keeping himself.
The question that should be asked is, why would Secretary Austin not want the president to know?
I don't believe.
I mean, it wasn't like he was going in there to get, something. Prostate cancer is not rare. Unfortunately, there's nothing to be embarrassed about. Why would he not want the president of the United States to know that that's where he was? What kind of character trait does this man have to want to keep that from the president? I don't understand. There's something more involved here.
I don't understand why you're falling for the ruse.
There you go.
Believe the president didn't know.
All right, guys, excellent discussion. That was a good one. Good points, Kat, Bob, all of you, Arnold, and of course, Andrew. Here's Howard once again. We'll be back in just 30 seconds.
Thank you, Richard. For fine dining, special occasions, or just watching sports in their sports bars, Pappas Restaurant should be your #1 choice. Enjoy a Pappas crab cake, or as Richard calls it, the Fab Cake, which is Oprah's favorite, is one of the many delicious choices on the Pappas menu. And they ship everywhere. They ship all over the country. With 4 locations, including their newest sports bar and restaurant in Bel Air. See you at Pappas. And also, Leading Edge Auto Body and Mechanical Repair want you to know that the insurance companies cannot tell you where to take your car. Richard and his family have been taking their cars to Leading Edge for years. They work on all makes and models. They offer free pickup anywhere in the Baltimore area. So call Leading Edge at 410-433-6433 or visit them at 5807 Falls Road in Mountain, Washington. They make your car look and run like new again. Back to you, Richard.
Sure do. Jeff Siegel is great. His whole staff there at Leading Edge. Take our word for it. They do fabulous, fabulous work. And don't let your insurance company say you can't go there. You can go anywhere you want to go. Well, we have a few minutes left, and we want to turn our attention to Annapolis for just a couple of minutes, where on this past week, Wednesday, was the session of the legislature was gavelled into session, and Governor Moore said, quote, "We have got to confront this inexcusable fact that 75% of all homicides in Maryland are committed with a gun. This," he says, "is a public safety crisis, and it's also a public health crisis. We need to get these illegal guns off our streets." He says we will. We'll touch on this briefly and get into it in depth next week on Square Off. Bob, you've got opinions, I know.
Well, first of all, the problem is that the governor has done more than want to get illegal guns off the street. He wants legal guns off the street too. The Supreme Court overruled, found that the Maryland law to get a gun permit is unconstitutional. Okay, so what the governor did in the last term was pass a law that prevents anybody that legally can get a gun from being able to carry it anywhere. You can't carry it on public property, and he passed a law saying you can't carry it on private property either, unless you get permission from everybody that owns the private property. In other words, he made it impossible. He's looking at it from the wrong angle. You want to get illegal guns off the street, get rid of the illegal people that are carrying it.
Bob, I think that's close, but not quite on point. Maryland had a very sensible, strong law called the Handgun Qualification Licensure Law. You had to be 21. You had to submit an application. You had to undergo an investigation. It was a perfect and absolutely perfect legislative solution to making sure that the guns stay in the hands of the legal people, not the criminals. The Fourth Circuit, not the Supreme
You can't
Court.
carry it anywhere.
But
You can't carry the gun anywhere.
let me
Hold on,
finish.
Bob.
The Fourth Circuit, in a 2-1 decision in November, struck it down. Fortunately, the full court this past week has decided to review it. If that decision gets reviewed, and if the Fourth Circuit's review is upheld, then Maryland will again have a wonderful a start to handgun regulation. The problem is in the Supreme Court, which came out with this totally wacky decision in 2022, striking down the New York regulations. And the Supreme Court essentially said any handgun regulation is presumptively unconstitutional. And in order to prove that it's constitutional, you have to show that there was some historic thing that had been done in the past to regulate it. The guns are different, weapons are different, the people carrying them and using them are different, but the Supreme Court has now mired itself in the 18th century.
Catalina, I saw you nodding. What do you want to say?
Oh, I absolutely agree with Arnold once again. And, whether or not you have HQL or not, which I do, right? Very few people know that. It's not what's happening in terms of gun violence in Baltimore and the things that we talk about and make these issues on shows like this and others is not about legal guns, okay? These are about guns that were bought across state lines and brought into Maryland because we haven't had federal regulation over one procedure and one database to where we know who all the guns belong to. The other side is that the technology has caught up with where we are leaving these huge gaps and holes in our policy and ghost guns. You can order the various pieces on Amazon and build a gun in your own home now. So while you're busy thinking it's about immigrants and illegals and registered handguns, there are people who are building them through the mail and using them. And
Andrew Langer.
None of these guns, none of the gun violence in Baltimore is being caused by ghost guns. It's being caused by people who aren't allowed to have guns. And when they're caught with having guns illegally, they're not being prosecuted for it.
Absolutely.
And that's the problem, is that when there's no consequences for using an illegal gun to commit a crime, it incentivizes folks to use illegal guns to commit crimes. That's the
I think
bottom.
you're right on the money with that comment.
Everybody agree.
The ghost guns in Baltimore. We've had numerous press conferences about it, so that's not true at all. And then also, the only thing that makes the gun illegal in the hands of somebody who's used it wrong is the fact that it's not registered to them. That's not again addressing what we've been saying for over a decade now about how did the gun get into Maryland in the first place if we have one of the more progressive means of access to guns and purchasing them, the Commonwealth states that surround us.
So you're going to make it harder for people to lawfully get guns because there are people who are who getting them illegally. I'm
going to do it because I remember the Gun Trace Task Force, and I know that people do straw purchases in Pennsylvania and sell them on the street in Baltimore, and then the people whose hands they end up in who aren't looking.
The problem is the wrong people.
Because of a problem that they're not making guns in West Baltimore.
The problem is the wrong people are the ones that are committing the crimes with guns.
Wait a minute.
The juvenile justice system needs to be revamped. Okay. There are juveniles that commit serious crimes with guns. Many of them are treated through the juvenile courts, and they are back on the street immediately, or they serve a year or two in a juvenile facility. The criminals keep coming back on the streets. The guns are not the problem. The problem is the criminals that are using them. They need to be removed off the streets.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are just about at the end of our rope. Go Ravens, go Ravens, go Ravens when you're back in action. Wow, hasn't that been a great season? And is Lamar the MVP?
Yes, he is.
Should be.
Thank you, Catalina Byrd.
Should be.
Hey guys, want you to know we're also on YouTube now. You can tell your friends, and it's at YouTube at Square Off Show. Is that right, Howard?
That's correct.
Square Off Show. And we're, of course, at squareoff.net. Our audience continues to build because of each of you. Bob Scherr, Andrew Langer, the amazing Arnold Weiner, and what can I say? Kat, it's great to have you back.
Happy New Year.
Oh, Happy New Year to you. Many more square offs. We'll see you next time. Same time. Once again, square off. Wave goodbye, everybody. Here we go. Bye-bye. Thanks.